Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the next podcast by PM Powered, your consulting company for project, program, and portfolio needs. I am Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio items. Today, I'm going to talk about international development projects because those are different types of projects that we have in the world, but they're very important to bringing third world countries up to speed, or developing countries, I should say, up to speed to have things that we have in the Western world that we just take for granted. So I'm going to talk about three different organizations that do ID type projects. ID projects have their problems too, and we'll talk about those after I talk about the three organizations. So the first organization is the World Health Organization, and they do a lot of things in the world. They also do things for Western world, but let's talk about what they do in developing countries. So one of the things that they are doing is Chagas disease. In 2009, the Medicine Safety Team, together with the WHO program on control of Chagas disease, initiated a project for the prevention for the PV of medicines used in treating Chagas disease. The objective is to characterize the adverse effects associated with Nefortimox and benzene diazole. I apologize, I can't pronounce those. Two medicines that have been in use for many years in Chagas endemic countries, but have not been monitored systematically. So right now, the WHO organization is actually monitoring these to see if what these two medicines are doing for the prevention of Chagas disease actually works. The next one is HIV/AIDS. The antiretroviral medicines pharmacovigilance project is implemented by the WHO Medicine Safety Team and the HIV/AIDS Department with the funds from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The project is expected to conclude in 2012 and includes the following key components. So as you can see, these projects that the WHO is doing is normally in association with other organizations. So you saw the HIV/AIDS is with the Bill and Melinda Gates. And what does PV stand for? Because I've been using that terminology quite a bit. It stands for pharmacovigilance. So I'm just going to say PV. The next one is malaria. The Medicines Safety Team is working to enable 6 African countries, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Cameroon, Ethiopia, and United Republic of Tanzania, to monitor the adverse effects of artemisinin-based combination therapies, that's ACTs, within the context of national malaria control programs. The project is supported with funds from the European Commission and is being implemented in collaboration with other relevant partners such as WHO Global Malaria Program, the WHO Regional Office in Africa, the relevant WHO county offices, the UMC and the WHO Collaborating Center for Advocacy and Training, and PV in Accra, Ghana, the WHO CC in Accra. So as I mentioned, remember that they're usually in cooperation with other organizations. So let's go to the next one. The next one is monitoring medicines. It's called FP7. It's a 42-month project with the aim to advance safety monitoring of medicines. So it's not just for one of these previous diseases, but for other diseases as well. And in particular, to involve consumers in the process. It was launched in 2010. The project, what goes under the name Monitoring Medicines, has been made possible by a grant by the European Commission 7th Framework Program, FP7. The project involves WHO, the Uppsala Monitoring Center, and many other partners throughout the world. The project has 4 key components. And it's strengthening consumer reporting. So they want the consumer to report if they have any issues. Identification of problems related to irrational use of medicines and patient safety by national PV centers. better use of existing global PV data, and developing active and focused PV systems to address urgent safety questions in priority diseases. And the last one that the WHO is doing that I'm going to discuss today is tuberculosis. Yeah, believe it or not, tuberculosis is still around in the world. So PV in tuberculosis, or TB, is essential because some of the medicines used in TB treatment have very severe adverse effects and can affect compliance. Inconsistent or partial treatment, lack of patient compliance, and medication errors caused by healthcare professionals can all lead to TB resistance. PV is essential to understand and respond to these issues in TB programs, particularly when faced with multi-drug resistant TB, MDR-TB, and TB and HIV patients. Partially funded by the Monitoring Medicines Project, the Medicine Safety Team, in collaboration with Stop TB Partnership, is developing a handbook for implementing PV within TB treatment programs. The handbook will be available to member states by the end of 2011. So you can see that some of these have probably already been done, but the WHO consistently is doing other things when it comes to health-oriented projects. So let's go to WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. Excuse me. Over 3/4 of the WTO members are developing or at least developed countries. All of these in Q or join are likewise developing countries. Whether the interests of developing countries are well enough served in the WTO is a subject of continuing debate. But even if the most critical developing countries acknowledge that the system offers them benefits. In fact, some of them include all WTO agreements contain special provisions for developing countries, including longer periods to implement agreements and commitments, measures to increase their trading opportunities, and support to help them build the infrastructure for WTO work, handle disputes, and implement technical standards. Least developed countries receive special treatment, including exemption from many provisions. The needs of developing countries can also be used to justify actions that might not normally be allowed under the agreement. For example, governments giving concerned subsidies. And the negotiations and other work launched on the Doha Ministerial Conference in November 2001 include numerous issues for developing countries want to pursue. 75% of WTO members are developing countries. So finally, what the WTO is, it's not an aid agency. It does have a role to play, particularly as a forum and clearinghouse for information on trade-related development, but they are not an aid organization. So aid for trade. The debate over whether developing countries need aid or trade is at an end. Today, there is a widespread recognition that developing countries need both. But WTO agreements do not guarantee increased trade flows. They provide opportunities. Some countries are better placed than others to grasp those opportunities. Some need help, aid for trade, and various other tools are aimed in enhancing the capacity of developing countries and participating more effectively in the global marketplace. We have seen where the WTO has actually helped other organizations with their trade needs, but it's not successful in all countries, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's talk about another one is by the UN, and this is the UN Development Program. And the UNDP, or the United Nations Development Program, launches SDG Impact to help unlock investment in global goals. So this was announced in New York. A new initiative led by the United Nations Development Program aims to help channel private investment and capital to meet the vision of Sustainable Developed Goals, or SDGs. Called SDG Impact, the initiative launched today at the 73rd United Nations General Assembly in New York will work with the private sector on how best to invest in enterprises and markets in ways that help achieve the SDGs, an ambitious blueprint for a world without poverty or inequality. So the UN has received a lot of bad press for not doing well on its projects and programs. And this is an initiative to help increase its programs and its projects in a better way. So to go on, as outlined in the Secretary General's vision to find innovative financing for Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals, UNDP is committed to using its global presence in 170 countries around the world and its reputation as a trusted partner to support countries in mobilizing private sector support for their development, said UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner. According to a recent report, Better Business, Better World, the SDGs offer companies a tremendous new growth strategy that will help build trust with society and broad-based prosperity. The report by the Business and Sustainable Development Commission also stated that pursuing SDGs would open up markets and new commercial opportunities. So this is there is a $30 million, it's not a million, I'm sorry, a $30 trillion shortfall in funding to achieve the United Nations Development Goals. That is why we must get large corporations involved. More large corporations must participate. They must think what they can do towards improving social and environmental issues, said Sir Ronald Cohen, chairman of the Global Social Impact Investment Steering Group and Portland Committee. One of the reasons that companies are hesitant in helping the UN in this SDG is the UN has been notorious for mishandling funds. And there's a lot of reasons for this. So let me go back and talk about all three of these and why I can talk about this for a little bit. Many years ago, when the tsunami hit in the Indian Ocean, I think this was about 10 years ago, and actually hurt a lot of organizations. I was involved with I would call it an ID. It wasn't a very big international development thing, and I won't even mention the company, the organizations that I was involved with. But we tried to develop a project management methodology for developing countries. And I found out a lot about that. There's a lot of things with bribery. There's a lot of things with corrupt governments spending the monies. There's a lot of things where there's 2 or 3, 4, 5, or 6 different organizations that are involved in helping a country with these programs and projects. And the problem is that there is not one overarching that you should have, like in a program that oversees how the projects are run underneath it. So consequently, they're kind of run in stovepipes. So a lot of money is spent when there could have been put together these projects so that the money could go a longer way. And everybody wants to have the the advertisement or the marketing that shows that we were the ones that did that instead of looking at the organizations. Also, there's logistics problems. Logistics in these third world countries or developing countries is difficult. And if we could use the UN, if all of these organizations could use the UN's logistics, it would go much farther because the UN knows how to handle logistics in these countries. So if you look at the framework that was developed by PM Powered, you see that the triangle has a lot of things that could help with this. And the neuroscience about it could help as well. If we look at if we looked at these developing countries and look at the end user, and if we could keep the end user involved in all of these, we would probably go a lot farther. Many times the end user is forgotten about in these developing countries, and we forget that they don't have the wherewithal that we have in Western worlds. And we put in things that don't work. Or once the organization that put them in leaves, the people don't understand how to use it, or they don't have the parts to continue it. So these are things that we have to look at and understand that we have to be able to do for these developing countries. And it's shameful that we don't. And it's shameful that we are doing it for our own benefit instead of for the benefits of the developing countries. This is not to say that there haven't been projects and programs that have worked, but there have been too many that have been susceptible to corruption and to greed and to corrupt governments. And we need to be able to have people stand up to these and say, no, we're not doing it this way. Or if you are going to make us do it this way, we're going to leave. And then the end user suffers. And many times we're not willing to put our foots down to these corrupt governments. We try to work within them, and much of the money ends up in the hands of corrupt governments, which is a shame. And I'm probably stepping out of bounds here because there's a lot of staying within the lines on trying to bring in projects and programs in developing countries. And it's not to say that there hasn't been a lot of good, because there has been. But we have to be able to stand up to these countries and tell them where they are doing wrong. But we don't have a coordinated effort between all of these different organizations. And that is on the organizations, because one of these organizations always wants to lead and the others don't want to be secondary. And that is wrong. If you look at programs that are done within corporations, we see this, and we need to have contracts between these organizations to show who's going to be the lead and who's going to be secondary with the projects. That doesn't mean that we can't all get the marketing or the fanfare that we have done things in these developing countries, because you can. It doesn't have to be just the program lead. It can be the lead for all these different projects. So stay focused, stay tuned to what are the needs of the end user, and you can do so much more for these end users, because they're the ones that are needed. My heart goes out to what's going on in Indonesia and Palau, and after they had this terrible, terrible earthquake and then tsunami. We can do so much for these countries, but we've got to do it in a coordinated fashion. We can't have all these organizations just go in and say, I'm here to help, because that's overwhelming to these organizations. Let an organization lead. Take down your pride and let these organizations lead. Let the best organization lead. Sometimes it's the UN. Sometimes it's WHO. Sometimes it's the WTO. Sometimes it's the International Banking Organization. Be able to say, I'm willing to take secondary and you be the lead. Because if we don't, we're not going to help the developing countries of the world. I'm Wanda Curley, and I hope I've brought you a little bit of sense of what we need to do for developing countries. If you have the time to volunteer. There is a Project Management Without Borders. There is other Doctors Without Borders, Engineers Without Borders. Think about volunteering for some of those organizations. Again, I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio needs. This is brought to you by PM Powered, your consulting firm on project, program, and portfolio needs for your organization. Please follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and you can do this through PM Current. Take care and have a wonderful week. I'll see you next Monday.